Berean Bible Institute. Any other hats that you wear? Father, husband, anything else?
Maybe you know me from my starring role in last night's feature film.
Brother Andy,
Thanks, brother. Appreciate that.
open the Word of God.
Been dodging paparazzi all day. No. Well, good afternoon, everybody. I hope you're not in a sugar coma or your blood sugar's high. If you need to take your insulin, go ahead and we'll let you catch up. But no, hopefully we can have some rousing time in God's Word, even on this Wednesday afternoon as the conference is, now in its fourth day. Yeah, it's good to be with you today. Why don't we go ahead and take a moment just to pray once again. Father, we're thankful that you've saved us, that you've called us to be your sons and daughters by your grace. Through Jesus Christ, we pray you bless our time in your word, and that through your word and through the working of your Spirit in our hearts, we'll know you more, that we'll just be in awe of who you are. We'll just bow before your greatness as we just look at your work and even what you have in store for the future. Father, we just praise you. Again, we ask Jesus Christ be magnified, and it's in his name we pray. Amen. One of my favorite Old Testament accounts, it's a brief one, but it's a goodie. And it's in the book of Joshua, chapter 5. And at that time in Israel's history, Israel has entered the promised land. Israel is camping in the land. They are taking possession of the land now in phases. And they're near the city of Jericho. And on one day, while they're there, Joshua sees a guy up ahead on the road. He sees a man with a sword drawn. You remember this account? And apparently this individual was very intimidating. It got Joshua's attention. And even though it was one individual, Joshua made his way over to the individual and said, "Are you for us or for our adversaries?" And you know what the response was? This individual said, "No." In the King James, he said, "Nay." "No. But as commander of the host of the Lord I have come." And that individual was none other than the pre-incarnate Jesus Christ, appearing to Joshua, superintending Israel's coming into the land and about to give them victory over Jericho. And he went on to explain how Joshua and the Israelites would defeat Jericho just simply by walking around it and blowing on the horns and everything. And the walls would come tumbling down, as we know. But I just think of that encounter. Joshua and his humanity, and all of us would think the same way. Are you on my side or on the side of my enemies? And God's challenge to that is, whose side are you on, Joshua? Right. Whose side are you on, children of Israel? Whose side are you on today, saints of the body of Christ? It's not up for God to declare what side he's on. That account reminds us it's up to us to choose to be on God's side in all things. And that's what Joshua encountered that day. And so today, we're continuing on in the topic of prophecy. We're looking ahead at God's promises of the future. And in our topic today, we're going to be looking again at the tribulation and key participants in the tribulation. But as we go through and we'll survey certain key players and groups that will be used of God or facing God's wrath in that time, as I was studying, the thing I kept coming back to was that idea that we always have to choose. We have to choose. As a matter of fact, you can see on your outline, if you got an outline today, I hope everybody got one of those we passed out earlier. I've kind of subtitled this message, All Must Choose. That's what it reminds me of. And it's interesting because today, when you and I share the gospel with people and we minister to people, there's probably times where we think somebody maybe says they believe the gospel, but we're kind of like, I don't know, did you really understand? Because when I see the fruit of your life, I wonder if you really understood it or if you got this. And, you know, sometimes people will profess Christ and live like heathen, basically. So in this dispensation of grace, sometimes we don't really know where people's hearts are, right? But in the tribulation time, it's interesting because in that time, it will come to the point where everyone's choice will be crystal clear to all the world around them, right? In the earlier message at 9 o'clock, Pastor Kurt talked about the false prophet, talked about the mark of the beast and all that, right? If you remember that. And that mark of the beast basically is something visible on the hand or the forehead. And everybody's going to declare their decision, who they follow, whose side they've picked. God's side or Satan's side, basically. That's where this is all heading. And so keep that in mind as we start to look at some of the key participants in the tribulation here today. Because again, we're seeing which side they pick. And so we're going to break down this choice as we go through, as it's on your outline. And the first thing you'll see on the outline, I have there, all choose to whom they give their hearts. And some of the things I'll share under this point will overlap what was shared earlier as we kind of review some things and connect some more dots. But underneath that, all choose a father. That's the word I've chosen there. All choose a father. God the Father or the father of lies. That's always the choice. You could say we all choose a God, but I just find it interesting you can put that word father there. God reveals himself as the Father who wants to reconcile all of humanity to himself. And opposite him is Satan, who we'll read in a little bit. Again, the great dragon, the serpent of old, Lucifer, the fallen angel, the fallen cherub. He is also called a father in Scripture. Matter of fact, there's an account in John chapter 8 when the Pharisees are trying to challenge Jesus when he's on the earth, and they're trying to trick him and trying to outwit him and trying to out-argue him. And at one point, they get into a debate on who their father is. You know, basically Jesus said, who's your daddy? I'm just kidding, sorry. They started debating, who is their father? And they're like, well, Abraham's our father. We're Israelites. We get all the blessing, you know. And his point is, well, you may have came from Abraham, but I don't know if you're really, well, are you really on God's side? I don't think so. And they say, well, God is our father. And you remember what Jesus told them in that account, John chapter 8? He says, you're of your father, who? The devil. Jesus knew their hearts. He obviously could see their actions. He knew where their heart really was. He knew where they had given their hearts. They hadn't given their hearts. They hadn't given their lives to God the Father, who at least they would claim. They were actually serving Satan, even unwittingly, because they were in deceit. They were believing lies. They couldn't even see the Lord Jesus Christ for who he was, which we understand that. And so when you look forward to the tribulation, I mean, obviously the two big players really is God and the devil, right? This is the culmination of a battle that's been raging since the Garden of Eden, when he came into Eden as a serpent and deceived Eve, and Adam disobeyed too. And he's been selling the same lie ever since through all kinds of different titles and words and vocabulary and jargon. But in the end, it's always, if you come on my side, you get to be like God. That's what it was in the Garden of Eden. I wonder if it won't be similar to that in the tribulation. You know, unshackle yourself from this being in heaven and follow me, as was talked about a little bit earlier. But again, this is our choice. People choose God the Father or the father of lies, and that's going to come to its culmination of tribulation. Everybody's choice will be visible. They're taking mark. It's going to be obvious where everybody stands. But yet even today, it's the same choice. It's the same choice today. Who is your father today? Do you know God as your father? If you don't, whether you know it or not, you're serving another father, another so-called God, and that's the father of lies, Satan himself, through all his spider webs of deceit, all his lies. Paul, the apostle, in 2 Corinthians chapter 4, verse 4, calls him the God of this world, who does what to the minds? What's he do? He blinds through deceit to keep out the light of Christ. It's the same operation he's been doing since the beginning. Let's look at Revelation chapter 12, and let's read a passage that sort of sets part of the stage here. Revelation chapter 12 is where we'll start. And we'll read a few verses here, probably through verse 6. Revelation chapter 12, verse 1. Now a great sign appeared in heaven, a woman clothed with the sun, with the moon under her feet, and on her head a garland of 12 stars. Then, being with child, she cried out in labor and in pain to give birth. And another sign appeared in heaven. Behold, a great fiery red dragon, having 7 heads and 10 horns and 7 diadems on his head. His tail drew a third of the stars of heaven and threw them into the earth. And the dragon stood before the woman who was ready to give birth, to devour her child as soon as it was born. She bore a male child who was to rule all nations with a rod of iron. And her child was caught up to God and his throne. Then the woman fled into the wilderness, where she has a place prepared by God, that they should feed her there 1,260 days. There's a lot in that passage. We can't unpack everything, but we're setting the stage. You have God v. Satan, basically. You have Satan there as this dragon. He's depicted. You know, I'll just pause and say, I thought about another title for this message. I really wanted to make it fit. You know what I was thinking? I was going to call it The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. I think that'd be a great title for, like, when you talk about people in the tribulation, the good, the bad, and the ugly. And in that case, the bad and the ugly are the same people. But anyway, it's kind of an ugly vision of the great villain, Satan. And he's depicted as this dragon. And again, that connects back to the serpent and everything in the Garden of Eden. And we won't spend a lot of time, but he's got this, he's got the 7 heads and everything. And as we go through this, you'll notice that how the dragon is depicted, and later how beast, the Antichrist, is depicted a couple of times in Revelation. They're very similar with 7 heads and 10 crowns, and there's a lot of similarity. And what that's depicting is basically the oppressive world power that will exist in the tribulation, the kingdom of the Antichrist, which will at the same time be Satan's kingdom, and Antichrist will be his guy. It's depicting the Gentile power of the day that will be targeting Israel under Satan's guidance. And it connects back to all of Israel's history, how nations who have been hostile to God have persecuted that people. And right in our passage, you have that continue on in the tribulation with the dragon trying to devour the people of God and stop his promises and thwart his plans. That's a picture of that right here. And you have this male child born there that it talked about. That's Jesus Christ. That's how I see it, that it depicts Christ in this battle that's been raging. Christ came into the world. But in the tribulation time, this woman is going to flee to the wilderness and be protected. And my thoughts on that is that's probably the Jews that leave Jerusalem at the midpoint of the tribulation, running from the Antichrist, basically, that God's going to protect some of those people in the wilderness, that this particular group of Jews will be protected. But it's interesting here, the woman is said to be, has the sun, the moon, and the stars, is involved in how she's presented. That goes all the way back to Genesis, when Joseph, you remember Joseph back in Genesis? He had a dream that the sun, the moon, and the stars bowed down to him. Joseph was one of Israel, Jacob's sons, and he had that dream. And so we know that this is telling us, this woman, this is Israel. This is who this group is. This is a Jewish group. And God's protecting this group here and keeping Satan at bay, if you will. And so this is what the tribulation kind of comes down to. It's a fight over a woman. I just had to say that. I'm sorry. But when I say that, I thought that came. So this tribulation is a fight over a woman. That's how, like all good love stories. No, God is, Pastor Hosfeld talked last night how God is using it to refine Israel. And in part, he's taken his adulterous wife Israel, going back to the Old Testament, that Yahweh was to be married to Israel, as it were. And she's an adulteress through idolatry, but God had promised, I'm going to make you like a bride again. And we're going to renew our vows, as it were. And when Jesus Christ comes back, what's one of the things that happen? The marriage supper of the Lamb, right? And Israel's brought back. He's restoring a broken marriage, if you will, through this time. And he is, quite frankly, going to pound the people who attacked her and thwarted her and tried to get her into the idolatry and that stood against her. And he's going to come back and defeat those individuals, as we know. So there's a lot going on here, but again, our main point there with that passage, it's God and Satan and all of God's program with Israel is kind of coming to a culmination as they prepare to enter millennial blessing and everything in the tribulation. And so they're clearly two key players there. And I find it so interesting when you look at the aspect of who's your father, who's your God, and every human heart is looking for this, a father God that will provide you identity, love, acceptance. And that's what, when you look in the world and you see sin, it's easy to say, well, everybody's sinful, but underneath that is this desperate heart that is looking for something, looking for why am I here? What's my purpose? What is it all about? And we're made for worship. We're made for this relationship with God. So that's why I have to start with these two. Because when people don't find that in who God is and Jesus Christ, they will turn to everything else. And that is what our culture shows us today. They will turn to anything else to try to satisfy the human heart. And that's why we're saying this major point here is, again, we're talking about to whom you give your heart in this choice. Let's move on here. Obviously, if I ask you, who's the big deal in the tribulation? Well, the next point, Christ and Antichrist, all right? Jesus Christ and the Antichrist. We pit those two each other. That's another choice. All choose a Savior. All choose a Savior. It's interesting because we know that everybody is sort of looking for a hero. Everybody is always looking for a Savior. When there's all kinds of problems in life, challenges, and it's just human nature. We just always want somebody to be able to come in, swoop in, and make everything better. Make everything better. Obviously, Jesus Christ came into the world, and he was supposed to be the hero. He is the hero of the story. I think Pastor Board kind of alluded to that this morning. We're not the hero. He's the hero of the story. He came to be the Savior, but to save us from the real problem, ourselves, our sin nature. Our sin, that's really what gets in the way. But the world, we don't think that way. We think so externally. We think of the problems of everyday life. And even in Jesus' time, when they knew the Messiah was coming, they were hoping a guy would show up on a white horse then and pound the Romans into the ground and turn them into dust and establish a kingdom. But we understand that, hey, he could have done that, but they wouldn't have been any better off. They still would have been all fallen sinners with no eternal future. And so he had to die for sin. And even when we look into the future of the tribulation, he's a key player. And a lot of things have already been referenced already. He's going to come back. He's actually the one that is distributing God's wrath on the world in the tribulation. He said that all judgment had been committed to him from the Father. And when the tribulation begins, and there's a series of judgments, if you've went through the book of Revelation, 7 seals that lead to 7 trumpets that lead to 7 vials. And you know who cracks the seals to get the whole thing started? It's Jesus Christ. As a matter of fact, in the book of Revelation, the wrath that everybody is hiding from in the rocks and everything, they recognize is actually the wrath of the Lamb. It's Jesus Christ as judge, as warrior God. And he's taking possession of the world. He's saving Israel. He's purging them as well. So Jesus Christ is a main player. He's the one that actually starts the tribulation. Matter of fact, we're thinking about the Antichrist here too. Antichrist is a big player, and so some things have already been said about him. He first shows up when Jesus starts cracking the seals, and there's a rider on a white horse with a bow. He shows up in Revelation chapter 6. He goes out to conquer and to be a conqueror and to conquer. And so in Revelation 6, even Jesus Christ is the one that allows, if you will, the Antichrist to even be revealed, to even come on the scene and begin his ministry of evil under the guidance of Satan. So we have Christ v. Antichrist, as it were. So the Antichrist, well, he came up a little bit in our 9 o'clock session. Again, he's called many things in Scripture. We probably have a lot of us probably sit and name verses and list ideas about the Antichrist. Paul called him again, that was mentioned earlier in 2 Thessalonians 2, 3, and 8. He's called the son of perdition, the lawless one, the man of sin. How's that for an introduction? What other hats does he wear? You know, you just keep putting adjectives on the guy. He shows up in the book of Daniel. Daniel chapter 7, 1 through 14. Daniel has visions. And part of this vision, I can't get into all of it. He sees a whole projection of the future, and it all comes down to this little horn that arises that speaks blasphemous things and everything. So even as far back as Daniel, this Antichrist figure is being predicted. He's going to come. He's going to lead the last big world power, the Gentile power that's going to be hostile to God and hostile to Israel. He's going to be the last one that Jesus Christ himself will take out. Also, he's mentioned in Daniel chapter 11, verses 36 through 45, when he is revealed as a king who will magnify himself above all that is called God. He will demand to be worshiped as God. And you know what? We talked about everybody wants a hero. Everybody wants a savior. In the tribulation time, there's going to be all kinds of problems going on, and somebody's going to show up with a lot of solutions. Somebody's going to show up and say, I can save you. I can fix it. I can be the one. I can be your savior. And most of the world will turn to him. Give them their allegiance. Give him their heart and follow him to the same end, to be separated from God forever in the lake of fire. Let's go over to Revelation 13 and let's read a few verses here, starting with verse 1, talking about the Antichrist. Revelation chapter 13, beginning with verse 1. Then I stood on the sand of the sea, and I saw the beast rising up out of the sea, having 7 heads and 10 horns, and on his horns 10 crowns, and on his heads a blasphemous name. Now the beast which I saw was like a leopard, his feet were like the feet of a bear, and his mouth like the mouth of a lion. The dragon gave him his power, his throne, and great authority. And I saw one of his heads as if it had been mortally wounded, and his deadly wound was healed, and all the world marveled and followed the beast. So they worshipped the dragon who gave authority to the beast. They worshiped the beast, saying, who is like the beast? Who is able to make war with him? And he was given a mouth, speaking great things and blasphemies, and he was given authority to continue for 42 months. Then he opened his mouth in blasphemy against God, to blaspheme his name, his tabernacle, and those who dwell in heaven. It was granted to him to make war with the saints and to overcome them. And authority was given him over every tribe, tongue, and nation. All who dwell on the earth will worship him, whose names have not been written in the book of life of the Lamb, slain from the foundation of the world. We'll stop there. But again, you get the picture here. He'll show up. He'll be a world savior. We can put verses together and understand, too, it talks about how he has a wound that he recovers from, and all the world marvels, and why a lot of us probably hold the view that the Antichrist apparently will be assassinated at the midpoint of the tribulation and kind of have a resurrection of some sort, some kind of a Satan-empowered resurrection. And then he will be in his sort of his final form, as it were, as sort of a warlord over the earth. And again, his mission is to take out the people of God. He's going to attack anyone who names the name of Christ. He's going to try to destroy Israel, and he's doing it all under Satan's authority. He's fulfilling Satan's plan. He's Satan's hero for the world. And the world, it says in that passage, they're going to marvel. They're going to follow him because everybody's looking for a hero. Well, because of time, we're going to move on here and look at the next point. We all choose a father, we all choose a savior, and we all choose what we believe, is how I phrased it. They will choose what they believe. And we're putting here the idea of the spirit of truth or the false prophet. I'm not going to talk about the false prophet a lot. That was dealt with in the previous session. But I just want to show the contrast again, that this is what's happening in the tribulation. People are deciding on what truth is. Does that sound familiar to you? People deciding what truth is. Again, this goes back to Eden. You know, maybe I heard it somewhere, but I always like to say, like in the Garden of Eden, when God was making everything, God made man in his own image. And you know what happened? Man believed a lie. And ever since, man has been trying to shape God into our image and reverse it. And we make God like creation and the creature or whatever. Or we put ourselves as God, our own God. But truth, what do we believe? What's true? Now, we know the Spirit of truth today, he indwells us and seals the believer. But you know what? He will be active in the tribulation. He will be active. It will be he who will be empowering the two witnesses and the 144,000 and the saints of God. He will be with them. He will be upon them. And they will do miracles. And a matter of fact, if you could probably go back and just read the first few chapters of the book of Acts and see the power of the Spirit manifest. And I expect that there will be a resurgence of that in the tribulation with the kingdom saints of God. And they will do those things again. And it'll be the Spirit of truth working through his people and seeking to convict hearts of sin and point to Jesus Christ and point to God the Father. And in that day, we know they will literally shake their fist at heaven at times and blaspheme instead of repenting and so forth. It'll show the hardness of the human heart in that period. And we'll just kind of keep that part short. But again, this idea of what do we believe? We're looking for truth. And again, Satan's main tactic is simply lies. Blind the minds of people from the gospel. It'll be that in the tribulation. He'll be using the Antichrist and the false prophet to blind people, to keep them blinded. He's doing it today. Maybe he's using Islam or Marxism or postmodernism. But whatever he's using, he's just trying to get people to believe anything but Jesus Christ. I don't think he's picky. I think he'll use anything to keep people from the gospel. You know, the grossest form of paganism in some lost tribe out in the wilderness to secular atheism, where we think we're so high and mighty and science will answer every question. It doesn't matter. They have the same impact. You won't believe Christ and you'll be lost for eternity, if that's what your truth is, right? So it comes down to, what do people believe? And in the tribulation, there will be a message that will be preached. It'll be the gospel of the kingdom. It'll be the fact that Jesus is the Messiah, that he's coming, and that they need to repent, and they need to give their heart to him, and they need to accept God on his terms. It'll be the gospel of the kingdom that the 12 preached. It'll be revived and reactivated, if you will. And that's what will be going on at that time. So again, it comes down to a question of, who are we giving our heart to? Again, back to that story, back to the account of Joshua meeting the Lord Jesus Christ on the road to Jericho, and he's got the sword out drawn, and whose side are you on? No, there's a deeper question. Whose side are you on? Whose side are you on? And I think that'll be a theme of the tribulation. Whose side are you picking? Who are you going to give your heart to? When we look at that contrast, as it was said earlier, you have the Holy Trinity of God, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, and you have Satan's counterfeit, the dragon, the Antichrist, and the false prophet, as many have called the unholy Trinity. And you have these two big choices, if you will, in the tribulation. And again, everybody's choice will be manifest. It'll be clear. It'll be evident because of the mark of the beast. And to whoever of one gives their heart, that is the one you serve. Another way of saying it is, whatever you give your heart to, that's what you'll live for. That's what you live for. So what we're going to do at this point, we're going to keep looking at some key participants, but we're going to mainly focus at groups of the saints of God. We're going to look at some primary groups of the saints of God in the future tribulation. You know, on this topic, by the way, I was challenged by this topic. Key participants in the tribulation. Where do you begin and where do you end? Because the list kind of goes on and on and on, depending on how you want to tackle the subject. It could almost be its own conference. You could give a message to every particular person or group we're going to talk about. But I've chosen to focus mainly on now the saints of God who make the right choice. And what we can learn from them, even looking ahead. They haven't even maybe been born yet. We don't know. They definitely, we don't know who they are now. But these saints of God in the future, what can we learn from them? First of all, we're going to talk about the two witnesses here. So if you're in your Bible, you should be close. Revelation chapter 11, we'll read about the two witnesses. These guys are pretty fascinating. Revelation chapter 11, God's two witnesses, a special ministry in the tribulation, these two individuals. And we've worded it this way: choose God's ministry. Learn from the two witnesses. See, these guys, Well, let's read the passage first. Revelation chapter 11, verse 1. Then I was given a reed like a measuring rod, and the angel stood, saying, Rise and measure the temple of God, the altar, and those who worship there. But leave out the court which is outside the temple, and do not measure it, for it has been given to the Gentiles, and they will tread the holy city underfoot for 42 months. And I will give power to my 2 witnesses, and they will prophesy 1,260 days, clothed in sackcloth. These are the 2 olive trees and the 2 lampstands standing before the God of the earth. And if anyone wants to harm them, fire proceeds from their mouth and devours their enemies. And if anyone wants to harm them, he must be killed in this manner. That's some pretty convincing evangelism, by the way, right? You know you'd like to be able to do that. No, I'm just... Anyway, verse 6. These have power to shut heaven so that no rain falls in the days of their prophecy, and they have power over waters to turn them to blood and to strike the earth with all plagues as often as they desire. When they finish their testimony, the beast that ascends out of the bottomless pit will make war against them, overcome them, and kill them. And their dead bodies will lie in the street, the great city, which is spiritually is called Sodom and Egypt, where also our Lord was crucified. And let's just skip to verse 11 here. Now after the 3.5 days, the breath of life from God entered them, and they stood on their feet, and great fear fell on those who saw them. And they heard a loud voice from heaven saying to them, Come up here. And they ascended to heaven in a cloud, and their enemies saw them. And I'm just going to stop there for time's sake, but we get the 2 witnesses, and this is about all we're told of these 2 guys in the whole book of Revelation or anywhere else in Scripture, really. You can make some cross-references, but one of the big debates about them is, who are these 2 guys? And there's been some different thoughts floated over the years. Who are these 2 guys? A lot of people think they'll be the return of Moses and Elijah. That's probably the most prominent viewpoint on who these 2 guys might be, Moses and Elijah. There's reasons for that. The Lord told his people in Malachi chapter 4 that he would send Elijah back before the great and awesome day of the Lord. He would send Elijah back. So a lot of people think one of these guys may be Elijah coming before the day of the Lord. So a lot of people think it's Elijah and Moses. And because some of the things they do in this chapter are very reminiscent of what Moses and Elijah did in their ministries on the earth. And another thought with that is when Jesus took Peter, James, and John up onto the mountain where he was transfigured before their eyes, which we can read about that in places like Matthew chapter 17. When they went up there, they saw 2 other guys with Jesus Christ. It was Moses and Elijah. And so a lot of people wonder, is that these 2 guys? Another thought is, well, maybe it's Elijah and Enoch. Why might people think it's those 2 guys? Apparently, they never physically died. They were both translated out of this world. Enoch, way back in Genesis, lived to the ripe old age of, 365 years, I think, just a young guy. And he said he walked with God, and God took him. He just vanished one day. By the way, that's probably how it's going to be with us at the rapture. I'm not going to say another word about the rapture, because I know Dr. Nix has been he's so nervous. Everybody talks about the rapture. No, I'm just kidding. I'm not going to say another word about it. And then Elijah was caught up in a chariot of fire, and apparently these guys didn't physically die. So that's another theory. Another idea, they may be 2 guys that just are born about that time. They trust God, and God just selects them. You guys get to be these 2 guys. Maybe similar to how the apostles were chosen. Maybe they'll be out fishing one day, and the Lord will appear and say, hey, you're my 2 guys. I don't know. I'm just saying, I'm giving you the ideas. And you can study, right? You can come to your own conclusion. I don't think you can be conclusive. There's good evidence and things, but I'll throw that out there. But I will say this, as time is fleeting, it doesn't matter who they are. And God doesn't bother to even tell us here. What matters is what they do. And what they do is faithfully serve God to the end in their lives. They choose God's ministry. I don't know who they'll be, what will be going on in their lives, where they come from, but I know on that day, they will faithfully choose God. And I believe these 2 individuals minister in the first half of the tribulation. It talks about the temple of God and people worshiping God at the temple. You can't worship God at the temple in the second half because there'll be the abomination of desolation. So I think their ministries in the first half. The Antichrist is killed and does his resurrection, and he begins to be worshiped as God. He goes into the holy place. He takes over the temple. And then I think that's probably when he kills the two witnesses. Up until that time, God protects them, but then God allows them to die. And that's what happens. So we can learn from these two guys because whoever they are, wherever they come from, they choose to faithfully serve God. They choose ministry. And God uses them in such a mighty way. And we see through their life and this testimony, even brief as it is, that we're exposed to in Scripture, they show us that God is worth living for, God is worth dying for, and serving him provides the greatest fulfillment in life. Let's look at another group for a few moments. And I'm just going to have you turn to Revelation chapter 14. We're going to talk about the 144,000 sealed saints, okay? The 144,000 saints. And here we're saying, choose God's plan for you. Learn from the 144,000 sealed saints. We know in Revelation chapter 7 that there will be a point in the tribulation connected to one of the judgments that God is going to seal 144,000 people who are Jewish, who are men. They're said to be virgins in chapter 14. And they are selected out of the 12 tribes of Israel to be basically an army of evangelists during the tribulation. And it tells us in Revelation chapter 7 that they're sealed. And the idea there in the context is they're protected so the judgments of God don't hurt them. And it seems like that they will survive till the end of the tribulation. Look at Revelation chapter 14. Verse 1, it says, "Then I looked, and behold, a lamb standing on Mount Zion, and with him 144,000, having his Father's name written on their foreheads. And I heard a voice from heaven like the voice of many waters, and like the voice of loud thunder. And I heard the sound of harpists playing their harps. They sang as it were a new song before the throne, before the four living creatures and the elders. And no one could learn that song except the 144,000 who were redeemed who were redeemed from the earth. These are the ones who were not defiled with women, for they are virgins. These are the ones who follow the Lamb wherever he goes. These were redeemed from among men, being firstfruits to God and to the Lamb. And in their mouth was found no deceit, for they are without fault before the throne of God." My thinking is the two witnesses appear on the scene at the beginning of the tribulation period. And they're preaching in Jerusalem, and they're protected. And I think the 144,000 will be some of their early converts, because it says they're the first fruits to God and to the Lamb. That likely that's signaling they'll be saved near the beginning of the tribulation. And most likely, because they are virgin men, probably and that doesn't say for certain, but they're probably young men, unmarried men, perhaps men in their late teens. Probably men like some you've read about in other places in the Bible, like Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. The four men we read about in the book of Daniel. We usually go by their Babylonian names, right? Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And Daniel's was what, Belteshazzar or something? But these four young Jewish men were taken from their homeland. They were young. They were probably in their teen years. And you know what they did? When they were dragged to Babylon, dragged into a hostile pagan culture that didn't have any use for the God of Israel, they chose God's plan for them. And they stayed faithful to God. And they served God where they were. And they accepted God's plan for their life. And so God was able to use them mightily. I think those four men are probably very much illustrative of the 144,000, the kind of men those will be in the tribulation. They will go out into the world. And you know what they'll do? They'll actually fulfill what the Lord said in Matthew 24:14. One of the things that the Lord taught his disciples when he talked about the end days and the tribulation and his second coming, all in Matthew 24. In verse 14 of Matthew 24, he said, "And this gospel of the kingdom will be preached in all the world as a witness to all nations, and then the end will come." That means it has to happen before the Lord comes back. And I think these men, the 144,000, that's God's plan for them. They'll be the ones to fulfill that. So we can learn from these individuals who may not even be born yet, who may not, because we don't know when the rapture is going to happen, when the tribulation will begin, but they will rise up in that time, and God will use them for his honor and glory and to get the gospel of the kingdom to the world. And you know what's so neat about, we think about the tribulation and we focus on all the judgment and the wrath and the awful things that will happen. But then in Revelation chapter 7, there's like this bright spot. And it's with these 144,000. And John sees how they're sealed and the tribes that are mentioned of the tribes of Israel. And you know what follows that immediately in the context of Revelation chapter 7? John sees a great multitude of all people, nations, tongues, tribes. And they're all singing to God. They're Gentiles. They're Gentiles. In the tribulation, I don't know what that number indicates, but perhaps millions of people will be saved through the ministry of the 144,000. Not by the gospel of the grace of God apart from Israel, which is how we get saved today, but the gospel of the kingdom through Israel, according to God's plan for Israel. He will use that nation in that time, even in the midst of wrath and judgment and refinement and purging, he will use them to be as a nation of priests. Because even amongst all the wrath is still God's love for humanity to save countless numbers of souls. He desires all men to be saved today. He will still desire all men to be saved then. And that's what we see through their ministry. So we can accept God's plan for our life. God puts us where he wants us. He asks us to simply be faithful to him so he can use us. And that leads us to our last point, simply choose faithfulness. Learn from the 7 churches. Now the 7 churches, I'm trusting you have some familiarity. You read about 7 churches in Revelation chapter 2 and 3. Actually, the book of Revelation was written to 7 churches, okay? Now, I'll just say something right away. It's my view, and I'm sure the view of many here, that the whole book of Revelation is futuristic. Because in Revelation chapter 1, verse 10, John talks about being caught up in the Spirit on the Lord's day. And my understanding of that is he is seen from that point on the day of the Lord. He's seeing the future from that point on, including these 7 churches, including God's message to them. It's still future. It's still waiting there for these groups to come up. These 7 churches are representative of the Jewish kingdom saints of the tribulation. The number 7 has the idea of completion, and it's probably representative. I don't think that means they're the only Jewish groups that will exist in the tribulation, but they're representative of all the kingdom church. And in Revelation chapter 2 and 3, the Lord gives specific commands and information to the 7 different groups that are listed there. And similar to today, how Paul's epistles, when he wrote to the Ephesians, it's also to you, right? And when he wrote to the Thessalonians, it also applies to you. Those 7 messages to those 7 churches will be to all the kingdom saints, to the Jewish kingdom saints of the tribulation. It'll be the warnings they need to hear. It'll be the direction they need for their lives, how to navigate the Antichrist and the false prophet's deception and paganism and all that's involved in that. It's specific information that'll help them navigate that time. But a reoccurring theme in all of that, without getting into all the detail, a reoccurring message to all 7 groups, you could summarize as, be faithful. Be faithful. Stay close to God. Don't fall away from his commands. Some of those groups were doing well, some of those groups not doing so well in those messages to the 7 churches. But the theme is be faithful, and teaches them how to navigate this tribulation period that's coming. Well, again, there's probably so many more things we could talk about, so many more directions we could go. But I just want us to think back to Joshua a minute. Again, back to some of the account of his life. And later in Joshua in chapter 24, Israel has won a lot of victories. They are kind of moving into a new phase of their national identity and existence. They're taking possession of the land. They're moving into that. They've taken possession by this point. And there's a portion in Joshua chapter 24. And Joshua is speaking to the leaders of the nation, and he's reminding them of God's goodness to them, how God brought them out of Egypt, how God had given them victory over such groups as the Amorites. God has been with you. God has directed you. And Joshua says to them in verse 15, he says, "And if it seems evil to you to serve the Lord, choose for yourselves this day whom you will serve, whether the gods which your fathers served that were in Egypt, or the other side of the river, or the gods of the Amorites in whose land you dwell." But he says, "But as for me and my house, we will serve the Lord." See, Joshua learned whose side to be on. And he challenged the Israelites in his day, whose side are you on? And in the tribulation, that same question, whose side are you going to pick? But you know what? Even today, right? When we present the gospel to people, they have to make a choice. There is no neutral. There is no on the fence. There's no middle ground. You choose to believe God and what he has, or by default, you choose to believe Satan and his lies. And that's really the only choice. And so hopefully just this walk through these individuals reminds us to make the choice to serve God in our daily lives, to not get distracted, get off track, and to evaluate our own heart. Who has captured my heart? What has captured my heart? What am I living for right now? Let's pray. Father, we just thank you for your word and how it challenges us in so many ways and how it reveals your greatness and awesomeness in so many ways as well. We pray, Lord, as we walk away, we just think on these things and think on the great privilege of being under your grace today, but what you've called us to be your ambassadors of grace today with the gospel of Jesus Christ. Lord, help us to take that to heart, to walk with you as our Father, to rest in the security and identity we have in you, and then to reach out to those around us, Father, to help them come out of Satan's lies and understand the truth of who Jesus Christ is. We lift this up to you. We pray this in Christ's name. Amen.